Got it.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Analytics in Action, How-To Series by Association Analytics. I'm Katrina McAfee. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager here at A2. We're going to give it just a minute for everyone to get logged in. While we're waiting that, our fun question of the day is, it's spring or getting there. So we're curious what your spring plans are as it gets warmer. Bill and Greg, what are your plans?
So parallel plans. Plan number one is to think about that vegetable garden that has been dead all winter and clear out the deadness of the vegetable garden and plant new vegetables. So peppers, tomatoes, all those great things that we can grow in our garden.
Nice.
All right, I'm doing, I'm going to Costa Rica, father-son trip. It'll be, started this, I don't know, a couple years ago, going on a quick trip with my son once a year. So this year we're doing Costa Rica. Not quite in spring break, it's going to be in May, but yeah, looking forward to that.
That sounds fun. I am waiting for my pool to get warm enough to go in because it's about 69 degrees still, and that's too cold.
All right, Emily's walking the dog. What else? Go ahead and jump in and introduce yourself, everyone. Got a bunch of people on already. So let us know where you're from. Go to the beach. Sounds good.
Shout out to some friends on there. Amber, welcome. I think this is our first time joining in person. Dave, welcome. I'll see you later in person at a live event. That'll be fun.
Right. Pam's going golfing. I'm down to the, I used to golf a lot. Now I'm down to like once every 2 years of golfing. But I enjoy it every time though.
Bill, we should have a golf trip where we go and just have fun, not with like the serious golfers, because I'm always like holding them back and they're like, what are you doing? Hitting the ball into the woods and stuff.
Yeah, I don't golf enough to be any good, but it doesn't prevent me from getting angry every time I hit one into the woods. So anyway.
Spring Canadian Chicago, ready? Putting your home on the market, that's big.
Very cool.
Good time for that.
Let's
Good luck.
get started. So today you are here to learn about everything you want to know about engagement scoring but didn't know to ask. And we have our esteemed hosts here. Greg Pollock is our VP of Sales at Association Analytics. Bill Conforti is our SVP of Strategy and Solutions. Both of them have tons of experience working in the software industry, working specifically with associations to help them get more insights out of their data. So I will let them take it away.
All right.
So today we're going to talk about a topic that I think is really important, all about engagement scoring. We've covered this a couple times, but today we're really talking about like, what are the things we see people get wrong a lot? What are the questions you didn't know you were supposed to ask? So as usual, we'll ask you some questions at the front. We've got some polls we want to go through. We're going to go through some, basic things that we think people get wrong on a regular basis and tell you how we think you can get them right. Obviously, we'll do some key takeaways. We're going to do this really fun session for beginners, and Bill has a tool that you can use to do your own engagement scoring without any platform. We'll cover that today. And then obviously lots of Q&A. So we'd love to hear from you in the chat. If you have a question, you can use the Q&A if you want, and we'll see it, or just drop it in the chat. Make sure you change it so everyone can see it. We'd love to hear from you throughout the process. Who are we? So we are Association Analytics, obviously. We are a software company dedicated exclusively on helping associations love their data, right? We want you to love your data, the quality of it, the consistency, the usage of your data. That's what we focus on. Everything from helping blend all that data together in an enterprise data warehouse to ultimately visualizing that data to gain insights from it. That's really what we want to help you accomplish.
All right, so let's go ahead and jump in with the poll question. So this is pretty straightforward. So today's poll question, we're going to be talking about engagement and engagement scoring. So the question is, what's the #1 obstacle to understanding and scoring engagement in your association? Some of us don't know what to measure. A lot of us probably don't have the right data, don't have the tools. Maybe you don't know how to calculate it. We can help you out with that a little bit today, probably. You don't know how to interpret it or take action. or maybe you don't have any obstacles. Maybe you're already an expert and you can jump into the chat and teach us all a few things during today's call. All right, that should be long enough. Let's take a look. Okay, pretty even split here. So I'll read it out just for the benefit of those that are watching later on. So the majority, or the plurality, right? 28% don't know what to measure, right? So you're gonna be in for a treat today. Most of the time it's really about how to choose what to measure. Now we're not going to tell you specifically what to measure, but we're going to give you a framework for how to choose that for your association. 18% of us don't have the data. 15% don't have the tools. Another 18% don't know how to calculate. And 20% don't know how to interpret or take action. We don't have any experts today, 0%. Right, so you're all in the right place. We're going to learn some things, and we're going to touch on all of those areas. So thanks for your participation. And if we hit on anything that resonates with you, please feel free to jump in again, ask questions, tell us a story if you have one that's relevant. We want to make this conversational and kind of have everyone participate.
I think I saw a couple people in the chat saying multiple answers. So there we go.
Yeah, so we very purposely made it, what's the number one or what's the primary reason, right? Because if we made it multi-select, I feel like a lot of people would have just chosen everything. So that's a good exercise, actually, right? We have to do the same thing when we're choosing our engagement activities.
Hey, Bill,
Hey,
I want to start doing engagement scoring in my association. I want to track everything. I want to really understand, like, why do members renew? What gets people excited? Like, I want to really just understand everything about my association. And I went to a webinar last week and they said engagement scoring was the answer. So I want to set that up. I want to understand retention, product sales. Like, I just want to see the matrix.
All right. Well, great. Hey, Greg, that's great, right? I mean, I think engagement can do a lot of those things you said, doesn't necessarily do all of them. But we're going to talk through all that, give you a sense for what engagement really is meant to do and kind of the mindset that you should have when you're considering it, and some of the things that it's not really designed to do. So maybe you can kind of get away from that a little bit. So we're going to be using these two guys throughout. So there's Greg on the left with his coffee cup. There I am, sort of looking, disapprovingly at some of Greg's ideas with my tie on and everything. So yeah, so that's kind of the setup, right? Greg's going to ask some questions. I'm going to answer, then we'll both comment, and you guys can weigh in on whatever side that you might be on as we do that. Okay, so with that. We're going to start with a quick review, right? So what is engagement? It's going to be no more than 5 minutes, right? We don't want to get bogged down here. This is a whole topic for a whole other webinar. In fact, we've already done webinars on this. You might have seen it. So this is going to be reviewed for some of you that have joined us before. But I do think it's important to, like anything else, right? We always say that you have to view your visualizations and things in context. You have to have that common language. So I want us to have that as we go through and we're talking about engagement. So here's one that might be familiar to a lot of you. So when we talk about engagement, it's an exchange of value. And it's important to understand that, because really we're looking for that sweet spot in the center. So if you look on the left of this sort of Venn diagram thing here, that's where the members is sort of extracting a lot of value, but they're not really returning much back to the association. On the right are members that provide a lot of value, right? I mean, they provide us a lot of money, they buy things. They renew a lot, but they're not really getting a lot, right? Those are the ones that, they just renew year after year, but you can't really explain it. You don't know what value they get, right? And so the sweet spot are the ones in the middle. They're the ones that they believe in the mission. They spend a lot, right? They're highly engaged, and those are the ones that have the most loyalty, right, for the association. So, but the thing is, if we're not scoring effectively, then we have no way of knowing who they are, right? I mean, except for some anecdotal, type evidence, right? And we also don't know how to get more people to that space. We don't know how we're doing, and we don't really know how to improve it, right? So to that point, how do we score, right? Again, whole hour webinar could be on this, but scoring is basically in 3 steps. We have to choose our activities, we have to assign weights to those activities, and then we have to calculate the scores. And so we're going to spend a lot of time on the choosing of the activities and the assigning of weights. Calculating scores is something that very often you'll have a tool that will help you do. If you don't have a tool, we'll at the very end I'll give you a template, for something that you can use to start to understand that, right? But, for now, right, 3 easy steps, right? Choose activities, assign weights, and calculate scores. Okay, so once we have those scores, we have to use them, right? And so this is this conversation that we get into a lot, right? And it's usually related to retention rate. And, customers will say, we want to understand who's at risk, right? We want to understand who's not going to renew. And engagement score is the way to do that, right? Engagement score is equal to, right, the probability that they're going to renew. And the answer is, well, not exactly, right? It's related, but it's not equal, right? It's not a direct correlation. And so, but basically it boils down to, what question does engagement score answer, right? Does it answer retention? Well, yes, sort of, right? And so what we always say is that engagement is not the answer to one specific question, but it's part of the answer to almost every question, right? Think about everything that you have, every question that you want to know. How do I get more members? I have engaged non-members, right? How do I get more buyers? How do I get more people to take our courses, to attend, to speak, all of those things? It really, the engagement score and how we understand that is a big part of that equation. Okay, so with that, any comments on that, Greg?
I think one interesting thing to think about is engagement scoring doesn't answer a lot of those questions you think it does, right? It's tangential to all the questions you're asking. But I'd say if we're going to do engagement scoring, it's an undertaking, and you should have business goals in mind. You shouldn't just do it because you should do it. You should do it because you say, these are the outcomes we think engagement scoring is going to give us.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? I mean, so how do I retain more members is one of the questions, right? But it might be, how do I increase non-dues revenue? Who are the best candidates for leadership or speakers? Who's most likely to participate in some campaign or some promotion? Who needs attention, right? It does kind of get at those at-risk members to a degree. And then in the aggregate, maybe this is most important, is as an association, are we doing better with engaging our members over time or not? Are we connecting with them? Are we building that foundation for the future? So, with that sort of as a base understanding of what we mean when we say engagement, we're going to get into some of those things that Greg mentioned, which are the things we want to know about engagement. So model building, or building that engagement model, is probably the most important, but there's a lot more to it that might not be quite as obvious. So with that, let's dive in with some of those things and some of those questions that you didn't know to ask.
Bill, when I think about models, I think about building model cars, not engagement models. We were just going to pick a bunch of things and start doling up points. What do you mean I have to build a model?
Yeah, yeah, you do have to build a model. And so the thing on the left is a donut, right? And so an engagement model is basically 2 things. It's activities and it's weights. So it's what you're going to count and how much you're going to count, essentially, right? So it's like a donut. If you look at that donut on the left, each colored section represents an activity or a type of activity, and the size of that section represents how important it is, right, to our overall picture of engagement. So pretty simple, but it's getting there, right? Getting there to build that donut that can be tricky. So how do we do that? There's a lot involved in it, but the first thing we have to do is we have to kind of workshop it, right? So we have a modeling workshop. And I think this is something that you'll definitely want to do. And in that modeling workshop, you'll invite subject matter experts from your key departments, certainly one from membership, events, from your sales department, if you have that, learning, really all of the different areas that have touch points with your members. And you're going to go through the steps that you see on the screen here. So brainstorm, right? Going to make a long list. Your first list of things you should count is going to be way too big. You have to prioritize that list, right? You got to cut some things off, right? Because it's not that important. And if you're wondering how to decide which ones are not important and which ones you should cut off, we're going to give you some tips on how to do that.
Well, I think the important piece here is what Kim said in the chat, is different people think different areas are important. Does that mean we're going to have like 5 or 6 different models here?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you see where we get to the next few steps, we have to combine and we have to negotiate, right? So combine means you want to assign points for this type of event and this event and this event, but really all those events are very similar. We're going to bucket those together and we're going to combine them into a single section, right? Or maybe you want to look at spending in a lot of different areas, like area A, area B, C, D, and E. But in reality, what we really want to do is combine that and just look at overall spending as one section, right? So we're going to work on combining those down into a manageable number. And the other thing we have to do is we have to negotiate, right? And so at the end of the day, the donut is the donut, right? It can't get any bigger. And so we have to find a way to decide, right? To by consensus or by management overrule or some way, right? To decide what are the right things to include on that donut. I've found personally that it's not as hard as it sounds, right? When you really look at some of the reasons why you should or should not include certain types of data, it usually sort of falls into place, right? Because some data is hard to get. There's a lot of reasons why you can't include certain things, even if you might want to. But then I would also add, and this is another thing, it's kind of like part of the testing, which means you have to be flexible. If you test it out and it doesn't work, you can add or delete things, and you shouldn't be shy about doing that, right? So you do want to be deliberate about putting it together, but it's also not something that is that's set in stone, right? So that's the workshop. The template at the end is going to give you some insights into how to do that. So to Simi, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. The question is, can you have different engagement scores for different programs or projects? You can, but you shouldn't, right? And the reason you shouldn't is because one of the things this should have been maybe in our definition of engagement, is one of the things it allows us to do is to compare one member or one customer to another on our shared understanding of what means engagement. So if I have a different engagement score or scoring system than Greg does, you can't really compare Greg and I and know who is more engaged. And that's really, at the basic level, that's really what you want to do with that. So if you have, thank you. So if you have two different programs, with slightly different criteria, you want to do your best to have an engagement model that fits over all of them. And what may happen is on your 100-point scale, it may turn out that 90 is the top score, right? Because you have certain pieces of it that just don't overlap between populations. But that's much better than having separate scores for different programs or different member types or anything like that. All right, great question. All right.
This is a tough one. Keith and I were at lunch earlier, and he was saying we don't even know what to measure. So we started thinking about it, and we just want to measure lots of activities, but we're not really sure what activities should be in our model. So we decided we're going to just measure everything. Let's measure everything. Is that cool?
All right. Yeah, Greg, that's not a great idea. Lots of things can be important, but you definitely can't measure everything. So, right. So we need to go through that process. We have to combine, we have to negotiate and all of that. And so here's some tips on how we can start to pare that down, right? Go for everything and down to the things that matter, right? Measuring what matters is going to be important. So first we're going to think about the activities themselves, right? So you want activities that drive and measure operational outcomes or revenue, right? So renewals, meeting attendance, purchases, things like that. You want things that drive customer experience and that measure customer experience, right? So what are the things that show you're providing a great customer experience, right? What improves your relationships with your members and your customers, right? So maybe community, maybe you look at survey responses, if you do NPS or something, maybe you look at those things. And then what about those strategic objectives that are hard things to measure, right? So I bet most of us have something in our strategic plan that says we want to be the thought leader in our industry, right? We want to be the go-to resource for all of our members when it comes to our specific area of expertise, right? So for this, we might measure like content downloads. Maybe there's like some really valuable affinity program that you provide to members. Maybe look at the credits earned, like continuing education credits, things like that. So those are all things that show that we're sort of industry leaders, right? But this is analytics, so we also have to be concerned not only with the type of activities, but the data related to those activities, right? So to that end, we want to include data that is accessible, right? I mean, it can be the most important thing in the world, but if we can't easily bring it into our warehouse, or we can't extract it from our AMS, then that data is not going to be used, right? So low-hanging fruit here is going to be membership, going to be donations, going to be course registrations, right? So what are some examples of some things that are typically not accessible, right? So here we're going to look at things like social media, right? So we all kind of, social media is out there, and there's people, sometimes they interact with our posts on social, but at the end of the day, we don't have Twitter handles for our members, and most of the interaction is for content that we put out there, and it's not like, most of our members are not out there mentioning our association on their Instagram pages or things like that, right? So social media interactions are interesting, but not much more than that, right? And when it comes to engagement scoring, it's really hard to use that data. Also, some of us have things like things that are just managed by other vendors, right? So maybe we sell subscriptions or books or even meetings for some of us. It's just managed by a third party, and it's hard to get that data. Now, you definitely should talk to those vendors, right? So that's a conversation for another time. You need to be able to get that, but for today's conversation, if it's not accessible, it's probably not something that we want to use in our plan.
I'd also say, I think a lot of people get stuck because they try and measure the things that are immeasurable or the things that are really, really hard to measure. And they never ultimately get an engagement score because they're not starting with the low hanging fruit, the things that are easy to measure, the things that they can count. They're trying to measure these nebulous things that are really tough and sort of out there.
Yep.
Now, one thing that data science is really good at is helping identify what's called a proxy. So we may not be able to measure something like customer satisfaction. I mean, we can ask them, but are they going to tell us or not? But we may be able to find proxies that we can measure that lead us to believe someone's having a good customer experience, right? If somebody comes back to our event next year, we can start to assume they had a good customer experience, right? I was working with an organization earlier this year, and they said their goal was to increase mine safety. So they were launching an LMS to teach miners how to be safer in the mines, and they wanted to ultimately measure mine safety. They said, well, measuring, how many people take courses isn't exactly what you're looking for. You might need to measure something like mining incidents by zip code and use that as a proxy for safety in those areas. So not everything we want to measure, we're measuring directly the thing we want. Sometimes we have to identify proxies that'll lead us to believe that thing is happening. And correlation, causation, we're not going to have that argument today, but the idea is if I can measure this thing that's related to it, I'm in theory measuring that thing myself. Whether I can get that number out of it or not, I don't know. But Emily's talking about I could measure volunteering. That's a way people participate and engage. You'd expect people who volunteer are having a good, positive experience. A lot of those things we want to find, what is the easy way we can measure this data that we do have at our fingertips, and that's where we want to start building our engagement model off of.
Yeah, great points, right? So, to Emily's question here, right? There are some types of volunteerism, like committee participation, that's something that's probably in your AMS, right? So that's something that's going to be easy to bring into your engagement score. You probably have a lot of other sort of micro volunteer things that members might do, like maybe they work at the bookstore at the big annual meeting or something like that. So there's a lot of things that they might do that are not tracked anywhere, right? So obviously you won't be able to use them. That data is inaccessible to you essentially, right? So we wouldn't waste a lot of time thinking about that, but but we'd look for some kind of proxy, for bringing that in.
I think they're talking about in the chat, we can just jump into some of this. Like, hey, we want to give points to people who volunteered to be on the board of directors. Is that something we can do?
It's something that we can do, yes. And so the one thing that I would caution you about there, and we'll get into this a little bit later, is it should be broadly applicable, right? And so I'm gonna put a pin in that for 1 sec, because this broadly applicable is coming up in one slide.
Okay.
But so let's say, just really quick, right? We want to include data that's measurable, right? And so what do we mean by measurable? It's counts, right? Can we count how many? It's amounts. Can we count the dollars? And it's rates, right? So it's things like ratios, like email click rates, right? So I think that's pretty clear, right? If you, and even if you think you can't sort of take a piece of information or an activity and translate it into a count, an amount, or a rate, my bet is that you probably can, and that we can find a way to measure that if it's really important for your engagement. So if you have any like that, then we'll see if we can help you do that. but to whose point was that? Emily, I believe, right? We want to look at things that are broadly applicable, right? So event registrations, community activity, email clicks, right? Those are things that kind of, they are accessible and available to every member, every customer, or at least a broad swath of them, right? So what we want to avoid for engagement scoring are things that are not very broadly applicable. And board membership usually is one of those things. And so what I mean by that is, so say you have, 10,000 or 20,000 members and you have 4 board seats, right? And so out of your 20,000 members, and that's really important for engagement. I mean, certainly a board member is highly engaged, so you're tempted to say, well, that's 30% of my donut, right? So now what you've effectively done is taken 4 members out of 10,000, and they're the ones that are eligible for that 30%, right? And everybody else is sort of limited to their ceiling is 70. And so if you look at engagement as a way to compare one member to another, and or one customer to another, and this thing really only applies to a few, then that's probably not going to be effective for your engagement scoring. So it doesn't mean board members are not important, and you should find other ways to mark them, right? And if there's only a few, in most cases there is, you definitely can find other ways to recognize them outside of your engagement scoring. So
Evan, coming through, the EDC champion right here. Can we roll some of these activities into larger categories? Board membership with casual volunteering. Yeah, Evan, of course, that's exactly what we would do. Evan is a seasoned expert here. Yeah, so we would say, listen, we can find these activities that we really want to count and measure, and they are important. Being on a committee is definitely important. We want to represent that, but we want to find a broader category we can put that into, and we might call that category volunteerism. Yep. And we might even want to go so far as to say like major volunteerism and minor volunteerism, right? Being on a committee, we could say that gets a major volunteer opportunity. There's a lot of committees you can participate on, right? But then we might say minor volunteering is, handing out those badges at the front desk at the check-in for the committee meeting. It's important, but it's not as valuable as being on the board. So if we can come up with those broad categories, I think we can make everybody in the room happy as we're negotiating, because we're not saying we're taking your thing off the list. We're going to say we're going to put it in this category, and it's going to fall into this grouping for the weighting pieces.
That's right. And those are things that you work out in your workshop. And the only stipulation really is you have to obviously have a way in your data to differentiate between those things, right? So you have to have a way to know that I'm just not on the committee, but I have a leadership position on the committee, for example. Now, the last thing I'll say about that is if you really feel like you must include board membership, then board membership is a yes/no type of question, and yes/no questions should always be very small sections of your donut, right? And so I don't advocate for small sections generally. The only exception to that is for yes/no questions. And so you could, if you really wanted to, have a section that says, look, all of our committee volunteers, right, volunteering in the committee is going to be 20%, and board membership is going to be 5%, right? And so yes or no, you either get the extra 5 or you don't. And that's a way of differentiating there. So jumping ahead with great questions. So we're going to get to all of these at some point later on, but keep the questions coming. So thanks a lot.
There's another good example that I can think about that's a yes/no is like certification, right? Yes or no. Hey, we want to give out like 20% of our points to people who are certified. That seems like we'd either have a lot of people who have those points or a lot of people who don't. It sort of washes out that measure for me.
It does. Yeah, so that's a question about weights, and we're going to it's on the agenda. We're going to talk about
Fantastic. That. Evan and I were talking at lunch the other day, and we were talking about how many activities we wanted to measure. And just like on the back of a napkin, we wrote down maybe like 50 or 60 things, and that was just our starting. Can we get started with there?
You can get started there, but you can't end there, right? So that's the brainstorming piece, right? We're going to start with those 50 or 60. But then we're going to prioritize, right? So we're going to cut some of those off. We're going to combine them into buckets, and then you work out. You'll get to something like this, right? So on the left, we have obviously that's too many, right? I mean, there's too many small sections there, and so think about this, right? Each section needs to differentiate, people within your population, right? And so if the section itself is only 4% of your total, right, and I get all that 4%, right, and you get half of it, right? I mean, what's the real differentiation between you and I? It's very small, and so that's the short version of why we don't recommend a lot of small sections, right? So the right number is 5 to 10, right? So it's not set in stone, right? But 2 is too few. 20 is way too many, right? If you think about that donut, you don't want too many small sections. So if you have more than 10, some of them are going to be really small, and generally speaking, that's not going to work. So in every case, I've done a lot of these workshops. In every case, if there's more than 10, they can almost always be combined down to some more manageable number. Right.
So we've got our model, we've built our scores. I'm looking at some scores and I'm trying to figure out what a good engagement score is. Why is like 1 million a good engagement score? Is like 10, like what's a good number people should have?
All right, what's a good engagement score? 42.
That's a great
All right,
number.
what's a good?
Every one of your members had a 42, you'd be happy. 100. If you find anybody with 100, I'd be excited.
1 million, right? Look, okay, so this is kind of like we're making fun here, but the idea here is that you have to normalize this, right? So which member here is more engaged, right? So Greg has 293, Bill has 715. Of course, I'm more engaged, but not so fast, right? It's you have to know about the model, right? So in Greg's case, maybe they score annually. The max changes every year. But this year it's 300. So Greg's like he's at the top, right? He's one of the top 5% of all the engagement scores in my association, right? Now on the other hand, I'm a member of another association, XYZ, right? And they score perpetually, right? Which means my engagement score just adds up and it keeps adding. And I've been a member for a long time, 20 plus years, but I've barely done anything over those 20 years, right? So I have 715 points, but the highest engaged members might have 5 or 10,000, right? And so just looking at those numbers, right, they're not normalized, they're not in context, so it doesn't really tell you much about whether that's good or bad. Okay. Now we advocate, excuse me, not advertise, we advocate, for normalizing your scores, right? And the way you do that is with weights, right? So that's the colors are the activities and the size of the sections are the weights. And so there's a couple of rules, right? It has to total 100. So the weight is the max for that particular activity. So if we look at that light blue section, it's 30%. Let's say that's for events. So if I went to the most events, then I get 30, right? If I went to the least events, right, then maybe I get 3, right? Depending on your quantiles, right? We usually divide it into 10 sections or deciles, based on each section. But your system might be slightly different than that. Okay, and so you get engagement points for each section based on your comparison to the population, right? So again, if you're comparing me to Greg or me to everyone else in the population, if I did the most, I get all the points. If I'm right in the middle, I get half the points and so forth, right? So it's all relative to what everyone else in the population has done. Again, that is a conversation for a whole separate webinar, but the idea is that you have to normalize it. And whoever said 100, Jill, you are correct, right? We recommend normalizing on 100. So 100 is a perfect score, a good score. 100 is a perfect score for every association, right? Based on this model. But a good score really depends, right? Depends on what you included in your model and how you weighted them. It may be that the top score is 80. If 20% is only available to certain parts and another 20% is available to a different part or things like that. But the point is, when you look at your scores, that it's on a 100-point scale, and how it's all in context because we know how that was created. Okay.
Chat is on fire, Bill. Jill and I both want to know. We followed all your instructions. We literally did everything you told us to do. And Jill and I are the only 2 people with 100s. Our average score is like way down there in the 20s. Did we do this wrong? Our members just don't like us. What happens? Yeah.
So. Possibly, right? The short answer is possibly. So what I was saying before about, what is a good score? Perfect. If you get 100, that means you got all the points in every possible section, right? So that's going to be pretty rare. But a good score really depends on the activities you chose and the weights that you assign to them. And what I would say is the best way to determine what a good score is to test that, and it's kind of qualitative in a sense, right? You want to look at your scores, and we know who some of our most engaged members are, and if we notice, right, we know anecdotally who's in that center section of the Venn diagram, and if we see those members, right, with the top scores, then we know that our model is working kind of effectively, right? If we see people that we've never heard of, that never participate in things, then probably we should go back and readjust our model. Okay, so trade associations, right? So for, again, a whole other webinar perhaps, but all of these concepts apply to organizations as well as individuals. And for trades, it really just adds one layer on top of it, which now we have two models, right? So we have one that applies to organizations, and then we have one that applies to individuals. And the cool thing about this is we can score the organizations as orgs, because there's certain activities, engagement activities that orgs can do, and there are certain things that individuals can do, and we look at both, right? And so you roll up the individuals. You look at averages, right, and the total engagement for all those individuals, and then you look at the things the org can do as well. So concepts are exactly the same. The numbers obviously are a little bit smaller when you're dealing with organizations versus all the individuals that work there, but we can do both. Okay, so not to belabor this point, but we want to calculate our points. We don't want to assign them, right? So we talked about how to calculate them, which is to right. So attending 5 meetings is 500 points, right? I mean, that's arbitrary, right? I mean, why not 600 or why not 700, right? If we start with our donut and we know that, that meetings are a certain percentage, then attending 5 meetings is going to get us all the points if 5's the maximum number of meetings, or if it's really high number compared to everybody else, right? So we want to avoid like making up numbers, right, for how many points a certain activity is good for. Instead what we want to do is we want to decide how important it is relative to everything else on our 100-point scale, and then let our model calculate the points that we get for it. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. I'd be glad to answer questions about that afterwards. I think we'll have time for some Q&A at the end.
We're going to have some Q&A at the end for sure, but I know we have got a couple other key points we want to make for all of our attendees. So stick around at the end. We're watching the Q&A. We're going to answer all these questions. And to Valerie's point, like, should I go back into time? Like, I've got 100 years of data in my AMS. Should I just throw all of that at my engagement scoring model and see what happens? Is all that data relevant? Do I really care that you volunteered to be on a committee in the 70s?
I don't think you do, Greg. There's a lot that goes into it, but to answer the question, succinctly, the answer is, for us, is 3 years, right? So for most purposes, things that happened more than 3 years ago are not relevant to my engagement today. And models that reset every 1 year, right? They just go from calendar year. They're just too arbitrary, right? So I donated some money, and it's worth 100 points for 365 days. And then on day 366, it's all of a sudden it's worth 0, right? So I think 1 is too few. But and maybe you want to do 4 instead of 3. Okay, fine, right? But 1 is too few, 10 is too many. But the point I want to make also is that don't forget about decay. And what we mean by decay is things that happened recently are more valuable and more relevant to my engagement than things that happened a long time ago. And at a certain point, they start to become irrelevant, right, for engagement. And so decay means that we sort of degrade the value of that activity over time. So in our case, we recommend 3 years. We do it in a linear fashion. So it's just like divided by month. So it's 1/36 per month for 36 months until finally, that donation that you made is worth 0 after those 36 months, right? So Joe says 18 months. That's that might be reasonable too. So what you don't want to do is have different decay schedules for all of your different activities, right? If 18 months works for you, I think that's fine. But I would keep it simple and have one time scale, for all of those activities.
I mean, you can also go back to what is the goal of engagement scoring in the first place? If we have good goals, like, hey, we're looking for people to serve on committees, the fact that I served on a committee 5 years ago isn't likely to lead me to serve on a committee now. right? That 18-month, that 3-year window, that's going to tell you what's going on right now, who is engaged today versus who was engaged. So those are important pieces to this. Here's a really tough question, and I think there's a lot of interesting concepts around this we can talk about. It's like, what if we change the model? What if we got the score wrong the first time and we want to go back and reorganize things? Or more importantly, what if we add new stuff? Bill, we really love our engagement score. It's humming along great. We just bought an LMS and we're going to install the LMS. And can I make my donut bigger? Do we now have 110 points? How does that work?
Yeah, so yeah, right. So Greg's thinking about all these new things he wants to add, and he's only taken out a little bit. And so I think we're starting to get the point now, right? That the donut is the donut, right? So you have 100% to work with. Think of it like a partnership, right? So if one partner leaves, we're going to divide those shares among the partners that remain, right? So we're still 100% of the entity. And if a new one joins, what happens, right? We're going to get diluted, or at least someone is. And so we have to make room for that that percentage, right? So we get that new LMS. We decide that that's 20% of our overall engagement. We got to find that 20% somewhere else. We have to take it off events. We have to take it off membership, or something else, right? Cool. I think we covered that. Does that sound good to you, Greg?
That sounds good to me. We've got an interesting question here in the chat, and I think Evan has snuck up on the answer for us, but I'd like to answer your question with a question. Earlier, we said everything engagement should come down to counts, amounts, and rates. If somebody renews on time, how do we figure out a count, amount, and a rate for that, right? So what we might want to say is, renewing before expiration is worth 100%, and then renewing 1 month later, 2 months later, 3 months later, or rejoining after an elapse, that might be our count. So we might want to say, renewing on time is worth 100% of the points. But if you renew a monthly, you get 90% or 80%. And then if you decide to renew later, you would get 50% of those points. So if you can boil it down to one of those things, a count, how many of them are we counting, and amount, how much money did you donate or how much did you buy, or a rate, like email click rates, I think you're good to go with renewing on time. Yeah. Yep.
I agree with Evan and Greg to a degree. I would say don't use that. I would put a little more blank. I wouldn't use that most likely because engagement scoring is likely to help you understand who is likely to pay on time and why, or why they didn't. But the actual payment is, I don't know that that's necessarily an engagement type measure. It's more of an effect than part of the calculation. However, we have had a couple of partners that have used it, and that's maybe another case for a yes no, right? Like maybe make it 5%. If you paid on time, you get all 5. If you didn't, then you get 0, right? So it can kind of have that effect of differentiating between Greg and I, right? So we did most of the same things, but I paid on time and he didn't, and so you can see that a little bit of yeah, right. Great point, Keith. Right. COVID affected a lot of things, but payment on time, or payment at all in some cases, was definitely one of them. Okay, look, so we covered a lot.
Go back to your goal too. Like, what is the goal of engagement scoring? It's not designed to answer every question you have. When someone renews is a very specific question that you can get at. Engagement scoring, to me, tends to be a little bit less than an exact answer. It's more of a, here's how we feel, here's how things are going on average, and are people renewing late is a very discrete answer you can get at. Bill, we've got this engagement score. I followed everything you did. I did the workshop. We created the numbers. I calculated my points and I assigned them out. And I've got this thing now. And I feel a little bit like a mule with a spinning wheel. I don't know what to do with it. I write it back to their profile, and I'm asking for some reports with this number in there. Like, what am I actually doing with engagement scoring? Because it took us a long time to get here. It better give me something awesome.
Yeah, right. So this is a great point. It's a great idea, and I think you're right. Getting that number and writing it back to the profile is really just the very tip, the very beginning of what you can do. And so I think now that we've been through all this, answered all those questions, I'm going to kick it back to you. I want you to talk through. Right, we got a quick review, 5 minutes on how do we use engagement scores. Katrina, if you wouldn't mind, if you have the link to the full webinar on this topic, you could put in the chat. That'd be great. But we're going to review it for everybody in just a couple of minutes here.
5-minute review. I think the most boring thing you can do is write it back to that individual profile. I think what really makes sense is persona building, aggregating that against all of our population and looking at that 10,000, 100,000 foot view of everybody. I think building things like journey maps. What does a successful onboarding commitment curve look like for someone who's a new member all the way up to board of directors? What does that process look like? Engagement scoring gives us a unique view into some of these questions that nothing else we have in our business can answer. But engagement scoring can say, what is the successful journey of somebody from start to finish look like within our organization? Where do those levels look like? What do people get stuck? Where are the inflection points where someone goes from being a member to being a volunteer, from being a volunteer to being a champion, from being a champion to being, on the board? It gives us a window into some of these things that are virtually impossible to answer other ways.
All right, cool. So what about the aggregate, right? So in the aggregate, when we think about engagement across our whole population, what do we do with that?
A ton of things, right? Validate your value proposition. What do we think is valuable? What's on that join page and why? And what do our members think is valuable? And what do they actually do with us, right? Looking at personas, how do we group people together? Can I figure out like, what does somebody who does this look like versus somebody who does that? Then we get into like segmentation and filtering. And this is great for trade associations. Do these types of members engage in the same way as those types of members, right? These types of organizations do completely different things from those types of organizations, but we send them all the same emails. I think that makes so much sense. Identifying those sort of inflection points, where do people get stuck or what accelerates people is going to be huge. And you talk to your marketing team about building personas, they're going to be very familiar with lead scoring, right, for potential members who want to join. But engagement scoring is going to be all about who are the members that are active and how did we get them there? What was that journey like? This is going to be gold for them to be able to understand what that journey looks like. And I said it's not the most exciting, but it's certainly exciting. If you have a score on someone's record, you're going to be identify who's my attendee versus my speaker versus my nominee for the award versus the person winning the award, right? Who's the volunteer at the front desk versus who's the volunteer on the stage? Who are my influencers? Who are my promoters? Who are my thought leaders? Who's going to send out that tweet about the upcoming Dan Network meeting so everybody wants to go, right? These are the things we can identify with engagement scoring, and these are really hard things to do.
Okay. All right, this is cool stuff here. Tell us about it.
Tracy, we're going to circle back on your question because it's a heck of a question. We're going to make sure we answer that for you before we finish today. So think about that journey map I talked about with engagement scoring, right? We want people to start learning about our organization. These are sort of like the interested. And we want to say, okay, if you're interested in learning about us and signing up, you've given us some information about you, we're tracking that. At some point, we want to convert you to being an active member. Now you've joined. Now you're participating. Maybe you're in our community. You're starting to take courses. Maybe you renew, right? And then we get you up to the second level where it's like, now we're connected. Now we're getting people to volunteer. We're getting people to present at our conference. We're getting them to donate. Think about these as some of those major inflection points. If we're going to send out a call to action for people to volunteer at our annual conference, who should we ask? Should we ask everybody in the population, or should we only ask people who are at that level and maybe right before that level? Why do we get frustrated when our emails don't get answered? Because we're emailing people at the wrong part of their journey with the wrong call to action, right? We're telling people who just joined that our boards has nominations and they should nominate people. They don't know anybody, right? We've just turned them off with the wrong call to action. So understanding where people are in this journey is going to be key to understanding how we can successfully use that journey.
All right, last point.
It's great for tons of things. We want to improve overall engagement. What a great board metric. How many of you have a strategic plan right now that says you should better engage the members and you have no way of answering that? We're going to give you that Excel spreadsheet later. You can get started. I don't think it's the exact same thing as retention, but it's certainly really close to it, right? Engaged members renew at a higher level. That's going to be key. I think optimizing our marketing teams, building segments, personalizing those calls to action is going to be great. And if we can't measure it, we can't affect it. So we've got to be able to measure this to build a sustainable membership pipeline. Somebody said it to me earlier, they said those old members who've been around for a while aren't going to be the members that we have 10 to 15 years from now. And if we don't start building a successful pipeline of younger members, we're never going to have those members on the board in 10 to 15 years. We've got to get those younger members engaged. If we don't know who our younger members are and we don't know how engaged they are, how are we possibly going to escalate them up this commitment curve? Hope's not a strategy.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. All right. So look, we got about 10 minutes or so left here, and there's a lot of questions, right? So I have this thing called For Beginners, and this is an Excel template that I put together, and it does a lot of what we've talked about here. It doesn't do everything. It's just really conceptually to get your head around it. So here's what I'm going to suggest is that I'm going to save this till the end. Right, so I think we might run over a little bit. So if anybody really wants to walk through this template, it's going to be available to all the attendees afterwards. I'm happy to stay on and walk through it. But for the last 8 or 10 minutes or so, I want to make sure that we wrap up, some key takeaways, some of the top things we get wrong, and answer some of the questions that are still hanging out there. Right, so happy to hang around afterwards and explain this. All right, so let's go ahead with the key takeaways, Greg, and then we'll answer the questions. I think we have several of them that are still there.
Yeah, so top things we get wrong, right? Engagement scoring does not equal retention probability. These are different questions we're asking with different answers. Is someone likely to renew or not? Very specific answer. What's their engagement score? It's more of like, what do you want engagement scores to measure? What's valuable to you guys? How do you want to measure that, right? What to measure? We try so hard to measure the hardest things. I want to measure every individual member's tweet. That's going to be the hardest thing ever to measure, and it's probably not going to have a whole lot of value for you at the end of the day. And then we get into this point system where we're like, hey, we're going to just start doling out points. You get points and you get points. And all of a sudden, we've got Bill with 700,000 points who we haven't seen in 2 years. And we say this engagement scoring is not working, right? And I think the other thing we get wrong is we don't use this strategically. We might use this in very small windows with one thing we want to do with it, but we're not using this to look at long-term vision of our organization. How are we executing on our strategic plan? How are we building capacity for future membership? I think those are some easy things we should do. So how do you be successful? Start with your business challenges in mind. What are you using engagement scoring to solve? Measure the things that matter to you as an organization. Figure out, again, you're not doing 100 things, you're doing 5 or 10 things really well. Figure out what those 5 or 10 things are. How do we group all of those activities into those 5 or 10 things and assign weights to them? And how do we standardize this process? We really believe that one engagement model for your organization is key. You can filter it and you can segment, you can slice and dice it, but we think having 10 different models is going to dilute the value of every model, right? Understanding that engagement scoring is a journey. It's going to have lasting impact. It's not easy. It's going to be tough. It's going to be challenges. It's going to take time. But if we go back to that business goal in mind, the journey's worth it at the end of the day, because you're going to get things out of engagement scoring like journey mapping and persona building that are really, really tough to get other ways. And be flexible, right? Don't try this and say this is hard and give up. Every little increment you make is a learning. Getting more data is better. Having better understanding is important. Whether you get to the end result in one try or not, it's the journey that really matters. The next time you go for it, you're going to have a lot more insight into how it works. You're going to know where those pitfalls are. You're going to have a better understanding of what matters so you can measure it. Be flexible.
All right. Thanks, Greg. All right. Cool. So we have some questions in here, and I want to try to get to a few of those. Get to all of them if we can. So Tracy's asked a question here. She says she's struggling with the math. Anniversary memberships, if people are joining and lapsing, and the numbers change constantly, and all of these kinds of things. So, and this idea of decay is a big challenge. And so I mentioned on the spreadsheet, the template that I provided, that it does some of the things, but it doesn't do all of the things, right? So decay is one of the things that it doesn't do because it's complicated, and that's something that you probably need a tool to manage, unless probably somebody like Evan could figure that out, right? And do it in Excel or without, a fancier tool, right? But the idea is, if you can't do decay, then maybe what you would do is look at maybe a smaller window, right? I think a year is still going to be too small, but maybe you just go back 2 years, right? And so effectively what you're going to be doing is you're going to be extracting data from your source systems, right? And putting into this Excel or, compiling data before you calculate this each time. It's not something you're going to be able to do every day or every month even, right? But when you do it periodically, you extract the data and then you just limit your queries to a certain time period, right? So limit it to 2 years. And yes, you're going to basically be giving the same engagement weight to something that happened, 19 months ago versus something that happened 2 months ago, but that's that's a limitation, right, of doing it without a real engagement scoring tool that I think we can live with, right? And it's going to be way better than not doing it at all. Hopefully that helps.
Let me make a completely separate recommendation for you. Hit the easy button. I'm not good at math. I find somebody who is, right?
No.
Not everybody has to be good at everything related to this. Analytics is not a one-person solo mission here. This is a team exercise. Build a team of people who can help you with this, right? Hey, we have a person who understands the executive vision of the business. We have a person who's really good at pulling data out of our systems. We have a person who's really good at math and blending that together. We have a person who's really good at the persona building, right? All of us serve a role on this team. It's not one person's job to be an expert in everything. Don't expect that you have command of every skill required to achieve these goals. Build a team around you. Find people who are good at this stuff. I guarantee there's that young person who just started in the office who's really excited about some projects and they'd love to crunch things in numbers for you. Like that's a perfect way to get people to join and participate. This sounds like an exciting project to me.
Yeah, Evan will do it for beer, right? So Joe has a good suggestion here, right? Go at rolling 18 months or rolling 24 months or whatever. So again, right? So it's effectively you're going back and grabbing that much data each month or each quarter or however often you calculate it. And so certain things are naturally going to drop off if they don't fall in that time window. And again, the only limitation is that everything that is within the window is worth the same, right? So you do sacrifice a little bit of accuracy, right? By depending on how long your window is, by treating those all the same. But again, it's that's a minor point in the broad scheme. If you're doing that, then you're way ahead of most everybody that is in the association space that we've talked to. So Marianne asked, if you don't use engagement scoring to predict retention, then what should you use, right? And so the question we get a lot, you should use a predictive model, right? So you can build a predictive model with an algorithm. Logistic regression is the method that we recommend and that we happen to use. But essentially, it uses historic data, and based on that data, it predicts the likelihood to do X, right? And retention is by far the most common thing that you want to predict. And the way that's different from engagement is it's mathematical, right? So the things that make the model, right? And you don't choose that. The math, the model itself chooses that. And with engagement scoring, it's art and science, right? But it's maybe a little bit more art in the sense that you're subjectively choosing the things that you want to measure based on your concept, right? That whole exchange of value, some of that is subjective in nature. So I would use a predictive model to predict retention. There are tools that do that. Acumen being one of them. We talk about that a lot. There are also a lot of service providers that would be happy to do a custom model for you.
I caution you, you're going to find out that you have members who renew every year who don't engage at all, and that might be confusing.
Yeah.
You might also find that some of your most engaged members aren't renewing, and that might be confusing as well. So go back to like, what is engagement scoring designed to do? And we don't feel that it's designed to predict retention, because there are lots of different factors that might go into retention that's more objective. It's a subjective idea. It's like, what do you feel is valuable to you, and how are you going to use that, right? Those are different answers. So both very important things, and you might correlate them. You might find out that there is a correlation between engagement and retention. I think there is, but you're also going to find people that renew every year and never do anything. And that's going to be confusing if you're using this as a retention model.
All right. So Valerie's asking, should engagement scores be made public? It's a great question, right? So maybe you have this, maybe you want to gamify it. You want to have a leaderboard and things like that. So my short answer to that is usually no, right? And the reason for that is this is for internally, for your understanding of that exchange of value. And a lot of things, you don't necessarily want the members or the customers to know how you're calculating that score. However, certain parts of the engagement score can and should be made public, right? So maybe you want to have a leaderboard for the participants in your community. Maybe you want to recognize members that are been the members the longest with a badge, or you want to recognize people that that go to a lot of conferences. All those kinds of things are great ways to recognize, make those public, leaderboards, all of that is great. But when you put it all together and you make an engagement score, that's really mostly for your internal use, in my view.
Yeah, I think sharing someone their exact number may not be the best, but sharing the ranges they're in might be helpful. Hey, you are an influencer, right? Or you're a champion. Those might be exciting things. I think recognizing your top people could be exciting. You know, in online communities, we often have a leaderboard that's a rolling leaderboard of who's engaging right now, so you see their faces. I could see a similar thing. Who are, you know, top members? Let's put a member spotlight on them and highlight them. Not necessarily saying Bill's score is a 70, but saying Bill is one of our most engaged members and we want to celebrate him.
All right. So there's one more that I see. I don't know if there's something else in the chat, but Mary Jane asked a question in the Q&A a while ago. Hopefully she's still on. Says, I've heard that that voter data, those who vote in the elections for the association should be weighted very highly. Are there some other activities that have evidence-based impacts? You know, so whether voter data should or shouldn't be weighed very highly, I'm not sure. I mean, that you know that would be subject to the things you go through in your workshop. I would say that if you have very low turnout, I wouldn't weight it very highly, right? Because it's not going to be very valuable for comparison. But I view that as in the same vein as other types of things like advocacy, for example. Like you know, very often associations are, you know, they have certain causes or certain legislative positions that they support. They want the members or the customers to do things to support them, and they want to measure that. And so I think that's a good thing to do. And it's really, if you can turn it into a count or an amount, right? Like how many times did I participate, and did I open the emails? Did I send the emails to the congresspersons, or whatever it is that you're asking me to do? If there's a way for you to count that, then I think that's absolutely something that you could include in your model. All right.
Tell me about this Excel spreadsheet, Bill, because I'm interested in seeing this.
Okay.
And thanks for hanging out a little long. I know we're going a little bit over time today, but we're going to send this out to everybody. So you all can take a crack at this yourself with this Excel spreadsheet. We've tried to boil it down to its simplest form, so you can accomplish this right away using this template we've created. Every association's weights are different, Michael. Everybody is going to find something that you value more or less. And that's where that meeting and negotiating really comes into play. I would say it's a combination of your strategic plan. What is the board telling the members? What are they telling you have to accomplish? It's a combination of the executives and their long-term vision, right? Who do we want to be and how do we want to grow? But it's also testing and checking and verifying. We're going to run this and look at the data a couple times and see what we get back, and we might adjust our weights accordingly. Maybe we added way too much weight on something or not enough weight on another thing. So there is no easy, here's the weights you should have. Obviously, we can help recommend based on your unique situation what weights make sense for you, but it's always sort of a trial and error to get to the right weights.
Okay, are we sharing the right thing? Excel sheet?
Excel, yeah.
All right. So thanks everybody for hanging out. We still got a lot of people on here. And so if you have a tool like Acumen or some sort of visual analytics tool with a warehouse backend, probably it has some functionalities like this. So you wouldn't necessarily need a spreadsheet, but this is really how to conceptually to get your head around what we're talking about here, right? So sample beginner engagement scoring. So first you have to decide what is going to be in your donut. This is your model, and your model has different sections, right? So in this case, we have 5 sections, right? You could add more. I'd recommend that you add a calculation line here that says so that's totaling everything up. And really the only stipulation is that the total of all your sections has to be 100. Okay. Now within each section, we're going to assign levels. Now, I said before that we shouldn't assign points arbitrarily, right? We shouldn't assign points, we should calculate those points. So this is kind of how we do it, right? So let's think of section 1 might be, might be meeting attendance, or it might be course registrations. And I would assign levels, based on the number of courses, the count of the meetings or the courses that I registered for. And then based on those counts, I would get a certain percentage of the maximum weight, for that section. And so, and then I would effectively be calculating the number of model points that I would get. And so sometimes I would have a section with 6 sections, and I may or may not have a 0 level. Sometimes I would just have 5 levels, right? And then I would just kind of divide it evenly, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100%, right? Sometimes I might have a very small section, which is 10%, which would be a yes, no, and I would either get 0 or I would get 100% of the points available in that section, right? And so if you think about the process of a model, a workshop, right? A modeling workshop, then you're going to start with a lot of different activities, right? And then you're going to effectively bucket those down into sections, right? And it's going to be things like donations might be a section, major meetings might be a section, right? Because we don't want to count your annual conference the same as we would like attending a 30-minute free webinar, right? They're not the same, so we have to bucket things accordingly, and then we can we can put them into the right context. So once we've done that, right, come up with our sections, come up with our levels. And again, if we have a tool, we won't have to do levels, right? Because it's just going to naturally compare everyone. And then we also won't be able to do decay with this, right? So we have to come up with a time frame that makes sense. We want to go back 18 months, we're going to go back 2 years, maybe 3. I wouldn't go back further than that without decay, because then, or even with decay actually, because then we're treating things that really are not similar as being very similar. There are some definitions that I put here for you, right? So the weight is the maximum for each section. The level, again, is a manual way of comparing everybody in the population based on these ranges or tiers. The section share is the percentage of each one of these sections that I get based on my level of activity, right? The model points is the weight times the section share, right? So the section is worth 30, I get 50% of that, right? It's 15 model points. And then the engagement score is the sum of all of those things, right? So we have 5 sections, I get a subtotal, I get a section score for each one of those, we add those up, and that becomes my engagement score. And then you can compare my score to Greg's and get a rough idea of who's doing more of the things that you want your members or your customers to be doing, right? So that's the idea, right? This is pretty simple, but it'll give you an idea of some of the things that we talked about today. And feel free to reach out with any questions that you have.
Awesome. So I think I can take this Excel spreadsheet and get started. How do I come up with the score for each person though? So then, do I have to like email my IT team and get the answers to who did the things? How do I do that? Yeah, so well, you might have to email the IT team, but this is going to be extracts, from probably from your AMS. Like most, when you start out, most of the data you're going to be using is already going to be in your AMS. It's going to be like membership renewals and event registrations and purchases, transactions, how much money did I spend, stuff like that. Over time, you can bring in additional data. Right? You can look at your community or your marketing system, right? See who's opening and clicking on emails. But essentially, you're going to take an extract and look at all of the transactions. But then you have to be able to match those transactions to people, right? So to the wrangling and the compilation, that might require some effort from some people that are more technical. But it's again, if you're doing it manually, it's not something that you're going to be doing every day. If you get a tool, right, it's updated every day automatically. But you certainly could have some scheduled queries to run in a compilation routine to do this, once a month or once a quarter. I think this was one of our better webinars we've done so far. This was good. I agree. This was fun. If I don't know if we have
If we have a survey after this, sometimes we do, to give some feedback. But appreciate any feedback that you have, and hopefully we'll see you on another webinar moving forward.
If you like this and have other content you want us to tackle, shoot us an email, and we'll try and add your content to the calendar and tackle it. If you have specific questions, we're happy to answer them for you. We do a lot of research to build these webinars for you. If you want to guest star, we thought about having a science fair where everybody could come and show what they've done. We didn't get any takers yet, so if you're interested in presenting alongside us, let us know. And we've got a lot of really fun things planned for this webinar season, so we're looking forward to seeing all of you at the upcoming events. We'll send you the recording, we'll send you the Excel file here. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you everybody for joining us. It was a lot of fun for us as well.
Thanks.